Something strange was moving in the Caribbean skies. Shapes that no radar could catch. They appeared in silence, then vanished like ghosts. At first, whispers spread, but soon the images leaked. America's stealth fighters had landed in Puerto Rico, only 800 kilometers from Venezuela. The shock was instant. For Caracas, this was not just another drill. It was a nightmare built on years of sanctions, threats, and silent wars. The kind of fear that crawls back from the past. Because how do Venezuelan jets or missiles fight shadows they cannot even see? Picture the runway, sleek black silhouettes rolling forward. F-35s fueled by invisible tankers above. Massive C-17s unloading gear, fuel, and weapons. Every second carried one message: America can strike at will. But here's the twist. This wasn't just about strength. It was a signal. A calculated move meant to change the balance of an entire region. And hidden behind it was a reason almost no one saw coming. A secret that will leave you stunned. The story begins in 2019. The United States made a move that shook Venezuela to its core. Washington recognized an alternative government in Caracas. In one stroke, it told the world, Maduro was not the leader they would accept. That single act was not just politics. It was a declaration of war without bombs. Then came the sanctions. They bit deep into the economy. Oil exports collapsed. Banks froze assets. Families felt the hunger before soldiers did. And as the pressure grew, Caracas turned to the only friends it had left, Russia and China. Moscow sent advisors, weapons, whispers of protection. Beijing offered money, technology, and quiet deals in the shadows. A new line was being drawn across Latin America. It wasn't a hot war yet, but the storm was already brewing. Two worlds were colliding, one backed by the West, the other by rising Eastern giants. For years, it stayed mostly silent, a cold tension, like a chessboard where every piece waits for the first strike. But the weight was building. Every sanction, every deal, every secret flight of Russian cargo planes into Venezuelan airfields. It was all pressure waiting to burst. And the question now was simple. What event could push this cold silence into the open skies? What moment would take quiet shadows and turn them into jets and missiles above the Caribbean? The answer was coming, and when it arrived, it would be louder than any speech, stronger than any sanction. It would be written in the roar of engines and in the silence of stealth. By 2023, the quiet pressure finally broke into movement. The trigger was a stretch of land called Essequibo. On the map, it looked like just another border, but beneath its soil lay oil, billions of barrels, enough to turn Guyana, a small neighbor of Venezuela, into a rising energy power. For Caracas, this was unbearable. The government declared Essequibo as its own, and then came the mobilization. Columns of Venezuelan troops moved closer to the Guyana border. Artillery rumbled on dirt roads. Fighter jets screamed across the sky. The message was simple. This land is ours. The region braced for a clash. And that's when the United States entered the stage. The U.S. Southern Command did not hide. It launched a public flyover with Guyanese forces. American aircraft roared above the jungle canopy, not in secret, but in full view, deliberate, unmistakable. For Caracas, it felt like a trap closing in, encircled by sanctions, now confronted by foreign fighters so close to home. For Guyana and its nervous neighbors, it felt like reassurance. A shield had arrived, but the shield carried a deeper signal. This was not just about showing the flag. It was about proving a capability, that Washington could put steel in the skies at any moment, that it could strike or protect without warning. No missile fired, no bomb dropped, but the message thundered louder than any explosion. The Caribbean was no longer just waters and trade routes. It had become a stage of shadows and power. And the question remained, if America could arrive this openly, what would happen when it came in stealth? By 2024, the stage was shifting again. In the quiet of the Caribbean, the United States began to breathe life back into an old base. The name was Roosevelt Roads. Once a hub during the Cold War, it had been silent for years. Now the silence was ending. Runways that once lay empty were cleared. Fuel depots that sat in rust began to hum again. Warehouses filled with supplies, and heavy cargo ships brought in crates marked with codes few could read. Piece by piece, Puerto Rico was being transformed. Not loudly, not in headlines, but step by step, it became a forward staging ground once more. A place where planes could refuel, where ships could dock, where armies could gather before moving out. To most, it looked like routine maintenance. But to those watching closely, it was something far bigger. It was the quiet return of American power into the heart of the Caribbean. Caracas could feel it. The neighbors could see it. The message was clear. This region was no longer empty space. It was a platform, a launch pad, a shield, and a sword at the same time. And yet the question burned in the air. If Washington was reawakening this giant, what would it use it for? What weapons would it place there to send its strongest message yet? The answer would not stay hidden for long, because soon, the skies themselves would reveal it. Not with noise, but with stealth. It began with a whisper. On social media, grainy photos started to spread, shadows moving across the Caribbean sky. At first, people claimed they were F-22 Raptors, the world's most feared air superiority jet. The rumors exploded, but soon, defense outlets confirmed the truth. Not Raptors, F-35s, America's stealth workhorses. And for many analysts, this was even more unsettling. Because the F-35 was not just a fighter, it was a network on wings. Its very low observable shape let it slip past radars almost unseen. Its fused sensors let one jet see what an entire squadron once needed to find. One ghost plane could map the battlefield for every ally around it. This was not just about flying, it was about rewriting air combat. For Caracas, the sight was chilling. Their skies, once safe, were now under the shadow of a fleet they could barely detect. Yes, Venezuela had Russian jets. Yes, they had S-300 air defense systems stationed to guard the homeland. But could those systems truly find a jet that lived in the gaps between radar waves? Could their pilots chase enemies they could not even see on their screens? Every expert knew the answer was dark. A ghost fleet had arrived at their doorstep, and in silence it carried more power than an army of noise. The question now was unavoidable. Could Venezuela's defenses ever stop an enemy that was already invisible? The first response came fast. From airfields across the country, Su-30 Mk-2 flankers roared into the sky. Big, twin-engine fighters built for long range and heavy weapons. Their mission was clear: find the intruders. But the skies gave them nothing. Radars swept empty air. Screens flickered with ghost signals. The stealth fighters were there, yet they were nowhere. Pilots circled, scanned, strained their eyes. But how do you chase what you cannot see? On the ground, the S-300 VM air defense batteries locked on. Massive launchers tilted upward, searching for a kill. Alerts buzzed through the system, yet still, no clean target lock. The missiles waited, the operators waited, but the targets slipped away like smoke. For Caracas, the dilemma was clear. The old tools of defense, jets, radars, missiles, were powerless against this ghost fleet. So the government leaned elsewhere, toward asymmetric defense, special forces, hidden bases, propaganda campaigns, toward foreign ties, seeking help from Russia, from China, from any partner willing to provide tools that might level the field. But alliances come with costs, and dependence comes with chains. The battlefield was no longer only about skies and missiles. It was about diplomacy. If Venezuela could not win in the air, could it win in the halls of politics? Could it use its alliances, its oil, its voice to resist the pressure closing in? Or would the silence of stealth fighters echo into silence on the diplomatic stage? The ripples spread fast. Across the region, neighbors took sides. In Colombia, leaders welcomed the move. They had long battled cartels, smuggling routes, and shadowy groups tied to Venezuela. For them, the sight of U.S. fighters in Puerto Rico was not fear. It was relief, a shield against threats that often crossed their borders in silence. The smaller Caribbean states followed, nations tied to trade, tourism, and fragile economies. They saw the American presence as a promise of stability. Ships would be safe. Flights would continue. The region would not be left alone in the dark. But not everyone cheered. From Havana, the response was fire. Cuba denounced the deployment as an escalation. The ghosts in the sky, they argued, were the shadows of a new Cold War. In Nicaragua, leaders echoed the same anger. They warned of a Caribbean once again caught between great powers, a chessboard where smaller nations paid the price. The map itself seemed to tremble. Every island, every port, every runway. Pieces placed and moved like pawns on a board that stretched from Washington to Moscow to Beijing. The Caribbean was no longer just seas and beaches. It was a chessboard of great powers. And at the center stood Venezuela, trapped between allies who needed its oil and adversaries who wanted its obedience. But this raised a larger mystery. Why did Washington risk igniting this tension right now? Why gamble with fire when the board was already set with so many matches waiting to strike? The answer was hidden in strategy, and it was about to surface. The world saw the stealth jets, but behind those shadows was a quieter power, one that made the deployment possible. From distant runways, C-5 Galaxies thundered across the skies, massive transport giants carrying parts, weapons, and crates too heavy for any fighter. Alongside them, the C-17 Globemasters, flying in a constant rhythm, moving fuel, gear, and even armored vehicles. And above the ocean, circling patiently, were the KC-135 tankers. Old, but reliable, they kept the stealth fleet alive in the air, feeding them fuel mid-flight. This was not just about jets landing on an island. This was the arrival of the entire machine of US air dominance. Every nut, every bolt, every spare part had its carrier. Every mission had its lifeline. Because without logistics, even the most advanced fighter is just steel waiting to rust. And that was the deeper message. The US was not only showing up, it was proving it could stay. Days could turn into weeks, weeks into months. A presence that could linger, watch, and strike at will. For Venezuela, that truth was more chilling than the jets themselves. This was not a raid, not a flyover. It was a forward hub, tested and ready. And yet, one question still hung heavy. Why here? Why the Caribbean, and not Europe, where Russia prowls, or the Pacific, where China rises? What was the real secret behind placing these stealth fighters at Venezuela's doorstep? The answer would turn the story on its head and reveal a strategy far deeper than anyone expected. In Caracas, the whispers grew louder. Inside command halls, officers traded theories like pieces of a puzzle they could not solve. Some said it was about oil routes, the tankers leaving Venezuela, carrying lifeblood to allies abroad. Others insisted it was the drug corridors, the hidden trails and flights that tied the cartels to global markets. And the darker voices claimed this was all a rehearsal for regime change. That one day, the stealth jets would not just arrive, they would strike. Each rumor carried fear, but none felt complete. Because the American move seemed bigger than oil, bigger than smuggling, bigger even than politics. And the silence of Washington made it worse. Every jet that took off from Puerto Rico felt like a riddle. Every tanker refueling in the sky felt like a hint of something larger. What if this was not only about Venezuela? What if it was about the entire Caribbean, the Atlantic routes, even the South American balance of power? For the Venezuelan generals, the uncertainty was more frightening than the planes themselves. You can fight what you know. You cannot fight what you cannot name. And that was the genius of the deployment. It planted fear deeper than any missile. Because no one could say for sure what these shadows in the sky were truly meant for. So the question grew heavy. What hidden US objective made these stealth jets more than just deterrence? What secret purpose turned them from guardians into something far more dangerous? The answer was about to surface, and it would change everything. The truth finally surfaced. The jets were never only about Venezuela. They were placed to guard and to threaten two fronts at once. One front was Caracas. The other was the Panama Canal, Latin America's lifeline, a passage that carries ships, oil, and global trade through a narrow ribbon of water. By landing in Puerto Rico, the US created more than a base. It built a dual-strike shadow zone stretching over the Caribbean, reaching both Venezuela's skies and the canal's gates. This was not just about parking fighters, it was about reshaping the map. Presence itself had become power, and in this new game, stealth was the loudest silence. For Venezuela, the real shock was not that America could attack. It was the chilling fact that America was already inside the gate. The skies were no longer neutral. Every cloud carried suspicion. Every silence felt like a warning. The echo of that September night lingered. The Caribbean would never be the same again. And the question now haunts every rival. If invisible power can appear here overnight, where else could it appear tomorrow? For Venezuela, the fear became real. The Caribbean was no longer just water and trade routes. It had turned into a stage of shadows and silence. This is how great powers speak, not with words, but with presence. Every jet, every tanker, every silent radar echo was a message written without sound. And that message was clear: dominance. The world is changing in ways most people never see. But here, you have. Subscribe now, and together we'll uncover the hidden stories that are quietly reshaping our world. Now the question is yours. Do you think these US stealth jets are truly here for Venezuela, or are they guarding something much bigger? Tell us in the comments, because your answer may reveal the truth others refuse to see.